How are we doing, guys? It is Hudson here with another video, and what I'd like to bring to you today is my 9.0 Fire Mage guide. As many of you know, I played Fire Mage, mained it in 8.3, and I've been playing it a lot on beta as well. And I've been putting out videos, giving updates on how Fire Mage has been doing throughout beta, and I think I have a fairly good grasp on what will be the best coming into Shadowlands. With that said, however, not everything is still set in stone in terms of tuning. Blizzard still changes stuff on a regular basis, so make sure to check my upcoming videos, or make sure to check the comments, because I will put any updates in the comments, or if I make an updated version of this video, I'll make sure to link it there. So, with all of that said, let's dig into this. The Mage has consistently been one of the best performing specs in all aspects of the game, and Shadowlands is for sure not an exception to this. All of the Mage specs are performing very similarly at the moment damage-wise, with Fire's damage niche being burst single target, execute damage, and burst uncapped AoE. Aside from its stellar damage, Fire brings one of the best survivability toolkits in the entire game, with multiple defensive utilities such as Alter Time, Blazing Barrier, Mirror Image, and even the two most valuable defensives, a Cheat Death and an Immunity. That's not all the Fire Mage has, however, as it is an incredibly mobile class during its burst as well as during execute phases, making it an incredible class for bosses with heavy movement during execute phase. And how could I forget Blink and Shimmer, the best personal mobility any caster is equipped with. Alright. I know you're clearly dying to play Fire Mage, so let's get into what you will need in Shadowlands to be the best Fire Mage possible. So, for the Covenant, this one's actually quite easy for Fire. You're going to want to pick Night Fae. Night Fae's ability, Shifting Power, is incredibly powerful for Fire Mages because Fire Mages benefit incredibly from cooldown reduction. And this ability grants cooldown reduction to some very important abilities such as Rune of Power, Fire Blast, Combustion, Phoenix Flames, all of that. It's going to be super good for Fire Mages. Now, just because Night Fae is the best doesn't mean that you can't pick any of the other Covenants. There's only going to be maybe a 5% differential in damage, and that will be on AoE if you don't choose Night Fae. So, if you're not super optimized, right, I would suggest picking whatever you like, but if you want that extra little bit of damage, definitely choose Night Fae. The talents that you would like to choose are right here. First row, choose Searing Touch. Very rarely will you ever choose Firestarter. That might be good in PvP, but Searing Touch in nearly all PvE situations is going to be preferred. Second row, Shimmer, is the best thing in the world. There's really no other situation that you would take Blazing Soul or Blast Wave. In the 30 row, you're going to want to choose Rune of Power. Rune of Power is simply the biggest DPS increase. If you're like super new to Mage, maybe just choose Incanter's Flow because it's easy, but honestly, Rune of Power is very easy as well in my opinion. And once we get into the rotation, I'll show you how to use it. At the 35 row, you're going to want to choose Flame On. For a little bit, Alexstrasza's Fury was looking alright, but Flame On ends up winning out, especially with the Conduits that you have that benefit from extra Fire Blasts. And what Flame On does is it decreases the cooldown of Fire Blast by 2 seconds and increases the maximum number of charges by 1. Row 40 is another utility row. You can pick whatever you want, but generally Frenetic Speed will be the pick here. This is less mandatory than Shimmer was in the 25 row, but for me, this is a safe bet unless you specifically need 2 Frost Novas or Ring of Frost, and generally you'll know if you need those if going into an encounter. Alright, this is the only row that's up for like any debate. And really all you do here is choose Conflagration and pure single target, and if there's going to be any adds that you plan on flame patching or flame striking, you're going to want to choose Flame Patch, because Flame Patch does a bunch of damage, especially in Mythic Plus. And what I'm going to show you right here is a details showing you the damage breakdown and how much damage Flame Patch did for me in one of the beta keys that I did last week. Now, in the 50 row, this one again is up for debate depending on tuning. I don't expect Blizzard to change the tuning, but it looks like Kindling is going to be the best currently. And like I said, I'll get into these intricacies and details of that in another video. But if I were you, I would currently pick Kindling. It's very good in Mythic Plus because it reduces the cooldown of your Combustion, your main offensive cooldown. And along with the Night Fae Covenant, you can get that down to super short intervals, like a minute possibly in some cases. Pyroclasm and Meteor aren't bad, but I think Kindling really does just win out on here for its ease of use and its effectiveness. For the Legendaries, there's a lot of interesting picks. And throughout the course of beta, the tuning of each of these legendaries has changed drastically. At the beginning of beta, Sun King's Blessing was the go-to legendary, especially for single target. It was really cool. You would essentially get an extra combustion in between your combustions, and maybe even 2 mini combustions in between your combustions. It was very cool. But after some tuning knobs, Blizzard changed it, so Firestorm is actually now the best fire legendary. The way that Firestorm works is if you use a hot streak proc, right? If you use a hot streak proc, you have a chance then to be able to cast Pyroblasts instantly and Flame Strikes instantly, non-stop, for 4 seconds. And that ends up being a lot of damage actually in both single target and AoE. So this is a great pick for both rating and Mythic Plus. Now, the only caveat to this is I would suggest picking Temporal Warp if you're looking to multi-class Mage and you don't want to buy multiple legendaries, because Temporal Warp works quite well for Fire, Frost, and Arcane. So for your actual Soulbind trees, let's assume that you picked Night Fae Covenant, because each of these has different Soulbind trees. For single target scenarios, you're going to want to go with Corraine as your Soulbind, and mind you, the Soulbind is what holds all of your conduits. It is the tree, and it gives you minor small buffs here and there in between your conduits that you choose. Now, for multi-target situations, you'll probably want to pick Dreamweaver, as it slightly edges out Corraine in multi-target scenarios. So for conduits, you're only going to be able to choose 2 potency conduits. Potency conduits are the DPS conduits, and what you're going to want to choose for these are Infernal Cascade and Controlled Destruction. Infernal Cascade allows you to get a damage buff for 9% or more damage each stack of this buff, and it lasts for 5 seconds. This buff is triggered whenever you use Fire Blast during your combustion, which will happen a lot, and if you time it right, which I will go into in another video, if you time it right, you can allow your buff to stay on for the entire duration of combustion, as well as a little bit after as well. Controlled Destruction simply buffs your Pyroblast. Pyroblast will be your main single target damage spell, and that will be doing a lot of extra damage for you if you choose Controlled Destruction Conduit. Now, the only caveat to this is, if you're in a Mythic Plus scenario, I would highly suggest choosing Master Flame Conduit that buffs your Flame Strikes damage and its radius, rather than choosing Controlled Destruction. I would still pick up Infernal Cascade, but I would pair that with Master Flame in a Mythic Plus scenario. Now, the 2 types of conduits that I did not mention yet are the Endurance and the Finesse conduits. For the Finesse conduit, you'll want to pick Grounding Surge in most situations because it reduces the cooldown of Counterspell whenever you successfully interrupt an enemy. For the Endurance conduit, I'd suggest taking Tempest Barrier, as it allows you to gain a shield that is 4% of your maximum health or higher based on the item level of the conduit whenever you use your Blink or Shimmer ability. Alright, so time to get into the single target rotation. This is what a lot of new players, especially Fire Mage players, struggle with whenever they first start playing the spec. This is most certainly one of the more difficult rotations in World of Warcraft, and I'd suggest coming to my stream or asking other mages for help, and also practicing on a target dummy if you are having trouble with this. Also, just as a warning, this is still very early on in the expansion, and the sims are not completely developed, so the rotation is not 100% optimized yet, but my expectations are that this is very close, if not the best version of the rotation. And if you need any other information to trust me on this is coming straight from the simulations that players use to determine their character's DPS. And the only difference between this and the simulations are that I'm going to open with a different spell than the simulations open with, and it does not decrease the DPS of the rotation at all, if anything. Now, getting into the actual rotation, you're going to want to start by using all of your on-use items and effects, and then you are going to go into a Scorch cast. Now, during this Scorch cast, you're going to cast Combustion, followed by a Fire Blast. This first Fire Blast will get you 1 stack of Infernal Cascade. Once the Scorch is done casting, you will then have a Hot Streak proc. You will spend this on an instant cast Pyroblast. You will then use Fire Blast again to generate another Hot Streak proc as well as an Infernal Cascade stack. At that point, you will have full Infernal Cascade stacks, and you will have another Hot Streak proc that you'll spend on a Pyroblast. Now that you have your 2 Infernal Cascade stacks, you're going to begin alternating between Phoenix Flames to Pyroblast, and then Fire Blast to Pyroblast, and then Phoenix Flames to Pyroblast, and continue until you run out of Phoenix Flames charges and Fire Blast charges. Then at that point you will begin Scorching. Now this can all change slightly based on your haste, but in general what you're trying to do here is you're trying to Pyroblast, and then hit a button that generates a heating up proc, which can be Fire Blast, Phoenix Flames, or Scorch. The best two to hit are Fire Blast and then Phoenix Flames. Now, the reason you don't do 3 Fire Blasts in a row is because you want to keep your Infernal Cascade at 2 stacks the entire time. And you would like to refresh your stacks of Infernal Cascade as close to the end of the buff duration as possible in order to keep it for the entirety of Combustion, and even a little bit after. Because if you do so properly, you will get a 20% or more straight damage increase during Combustion. Once you're done with Combustion, you are going to cast your Night Fae Covenant ability if you are a Night Fae. And once that is done, or if you're not a Night Fae, you will just immediately cast Rune of Power. You will go into this Rune of Power, and you will begin your standard rotation. Your standard rotation is simply spamming Fireball, and then whenever you get a heating up proc, you will cast Fire Blast during your Fireball cast, and then follow up your Fireball immediately with an instant cast Pyroblast, and then continue spamming Fireballs, and follow the same rules of casting Fire Blast whenever you have a heating up proc. Now, the only caveat to this is you would like to make sure that you have full Fire Blast charges going into each Combustion, and you will never really cast Phoenix Flames outside of Combustion, so you don't have to worry about those in single target. With the talent build that I showed you as well, you should be able to get your Combustions down to around a minute, and even less than a minute with the Night Fae ability, which is pretty awesome. Then essentially the rest of the time, you will just be using your Combustion and your Rune of Power on cooldown, and just make sure to never overlap the two, prioritizing your Combustion at all times. Alright, so for the AoE rotation, kind of the same deal goes as the single target rotation. This is not something that is 100% set in stone, but my prediction is that this will be what is best for the majority of 9.0. Now, I am going to start with a different opener than the sim suggests, but again, much like the single target rotation, this does not change your damage much, if at all. So for the Combustion phase, in AoE, the best way that I can explain this is you're going to want to get as many instant cast Flame Strikes as possible on the enemies while keeping your Infernal Cascade buff up. Now, there are going to be different ways to do this at different levels of haste, but what I'm going to show you is what works for me at the base item level. The best way to do this is to parry your Phoenix Flames with your Fire Blasts, and since your Fire Blasts are off the GCD, you can actually use them while you're casting a Phoenix Flames, and once they both hit, you will have a Hot Streak, which you can then use your next GCD on a Flame Strike cast. And then you can repeat until you're out of both Fire Blast and Phoenix Flames, and then you will begin using Scorches repeatedly to generate those Hot Streak procs while Combustion lasts. Now, one caveat to this is if you find yourself doing that and you don't have Bloodlust up, you may end up losing your Infernal Cascade stacks, which can be pretty bad and can be a big damage loss, especially during your biggest cooldown Combustion. One way to combat this is to hold off on using Fire Blasts until you're at the very end of your Infernal Cascade buff ending. This may all seem a little bit confusing, but I would suggest slowing down the videos if you would like to really figure out how to do this. And also, I will link a guide below where you can see the priority list and you can kind of read this stuff in case if you're not as visual of a learner. Now, you want to do this Flame Strike Combustion rotation, beginning at 3 targets if you have Flame Patch, and beginning at 6 targets if you do not have Flame Patch. Directly following the Combustion, you're going to want to do your Shifting Power if you're a Night Fae, or your Rune of Power after that if you are a Night Fae, or immediately following Combustion if you are not a Night Fae. You will then begin your standard rotation after that is done. Your standard rotation consists of hard casting Flame Strike. What that means is Flame Strike has a very long cast, and you are going to sit there and cast it out completely. While you are Flame Striking, you are going to generate Hot Streak procs that you can use instant cast Flame Strikes on by casting your Fire Blast during your Flame Strike cast. The only caveat to this being the same as the single target rotation, you want to make sure you still have 3 Fire Blasts and 3 Phoenix Flames going into your Combustion. Now, with the strength of Flame Strike currently, and Flame Patch, you're actually going to want to start hard casting Flame Strike on 2 targets if you have Flame Patch, or 3 targets if you do not have Flame Patch. Which just kind of shows how strong Flame Strike and Flame Patch are right now. Also, after recording this, I just want to come back and say that I'm still just touching the surface of how to optimize your rotation. So seriously, if you would like to be the best mage possible, I would do your own research and follow some of the links that I'll put in the description below. So for your trinkets, you're going to want to have at least one on-use trinket that for most people, the best option for this would be the Sinful Aspirant or Gladiator's Badge. This trinket is an on-use that simply gives you intellect and has a secondary stat of versatility. As for the second trinket, you're probably going to want to check a list to stay up to date with how the tuning of the current trinkets are, and make sure to always sim yourself, of course. Now, getting into the stat weights, I don't believe that stat weights given in a priority order is very helpful. To be quite honest, I would suggest simming yourself with raid bots or the Simulation Craft software. But if you would like a stat weight, the best that I can give currently is haste being the most valuable, followed by versatility being similarly valuable to mastery, then followed by critical strike. Now, for your enchants, I would suggest using Eternal Stats on your chest, Sinful Revelation on your weapon, Eternal Intellect on your bracers, Tentative Haste or whatever your best stat is on your 2 rings, then Fortified Avoidance or Soul Vitality on your cloak based on your preference. With the introduction of Shadowlands, there are these new temporary type enchantments or weapon or armor enhancements, and the 2 that you should have are Heavy Desolate Armor Kits for your chest and Shadow Core Oils for your weapon. For your consumables, I would recommend starting off with just using Intellect Potions and the base Intellect food, and then if Sims suggest that these new potions that interact with your weapon oils are better than the Intellect Potions, then I would go with those instead. So I hope I offered you guys some help with this video, and if you have any more questions, make sure to stop by my Twitch that I linked in the description. It is twitch.tv/hvdsxnn. And if you'd like my UI, I have it for free. Just stop by my Twitch and type !UI and you can get it for yourself if you enjoyed it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.